The galaxy was never silent, but the whispers that spread after the first clash with humans carried fear that no one could ignore. They were not the strongest race, nor the most advanced, yet their defiance shook the stars. The Arraketh Empire, led by its proud queen Seraph, had stretched across 1,000 systems without resistance. But on the edge of human space, something went wrong. The queen had expected a swift victory. Her fleets were endless, her soldiers trained from birth, and her technology unmatched. Yet, when they pressed into human colonies, they did not find submission. They found stubborn fighters who refused to surrender. Entire villages burned themselves rather than kneel, and from the ruins of their broken cities, humans struck back with fire that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. The Queen sent armies to crush them, but the humans adapted. Where one strategy failed, another was born overnight. Their weapons were crude compared to alien engineering, but the way they used them was terrifying. They fought not only with machines, but with something deeper. Something no empire could measure. A will to resist until nothing remained. That frightened the Queen more than fleets and cannons ever could. It was during these brutal months that the Queen first noticed a human who stood apart from the rest. He was no king, no soldier of high rank, yet he fought with courage that made even her warriors hesitate. He was captured after a raid that cost her generals dearly. Instead of killing him as the council demanded, the Queen ordered him brought before her. She did not know why. Perhaps she wanted to look into the eyes of the creature who had made her empire bleed. When the human stood before her throne, there was no fear in him. His clothes were torn, his body marked by wounds, yet he did not bow. He looked straight into her golden eyes, and the hall fell silent. The Queen was not used to being stared at like an equal, but he did not flinch. For the first time, she felt something stir within her chest. Not weakness, not admiration. Something else. Something she could not name. Beside her throne stood her daughter, Princess Alenia, young, bright, and filled with curiosity about the humans she had only heard of. She watched the prisoner closely, her small hands gripping the edge of her gown. Where the council saw an enemy, she saw something strange, something almost wonderful. And though she said nothing, the Queen could see the spark in her daughter's eyes. A spark she did not like. The council shouted for the human's death. They called him dangerous, a beast in flesh. They demanded blood to restore their honor. But the Queen raised her hand, and the chamber fell silent. She declared that the human would not die. He would remain her subject, watched and studied, until she herself chose his fate. The council protested, but none dared defy her. And so the man lived, though in chains. That night, as the palace torches burned, the Queen looked at her daughter. The girl whispered that the human's eyes were kind. Too kind for an enemy. The Queen dismissed her words. Yet in the darkness she remembered them. The human had not begged for mercy. He had not cursed. He had only stood, proud and unbroken. And somehow, that image refused to leave her mind. The war raged on beyond the palace walls, but inside its golden halls something more dangerous had begun. A question was taking root. A question that would one day echo through the heart of the empire. Why would a human, fragile and alone, face a queen without fear? And why, despite everything, did her daughter's gaze linger on him so long? The human was kept inside the palace under watchful eyes, but he did not act like a prisoner. He worked when ordered, spoke when spoken to, yet there was no trace of fear in him. The guards whispered that he carried himself like a warrior even without a weapon. To the Queen, this was troubling. To her daughter, it was fascinating. Princess Alenia often wandered near the gardens where the human was allowed to walk under guard. She was young, but her questions were sharp. Why did he fight so hard for his people? Why did he not surrender when his world was burning? Each time she asked, he answered with calm words. Because humans did not bend. Because freedom was worth pain. Because hope was never worthless. The Queen noticed the way her daughter listened to him. At first she ignored it, thinking it was only childish curiosity. But as days turned to weeks, she saw something else. The girl's eyes followed him with a quiet longing. The Queen felt anger rise inside her, not because her daughter admired strength, but because she admired it in a human, a race the Empire had declared savage. In council meetings, the war grew bloodier. Reports told of human victories where there should have been none. Entire fleets vanished in ambushes. Human tactics shifted faster than our admirals could predict. Every plan was broken by something unexpected. It was as if the humans thrived in chaos itself. The Queen wondered if keeping this human alive was a mistake. Perhaps he carried the same spirit as those who refused to kneel on the battlefield. But when she looked at him, she saw no beast. His gaze was steady. His words were measured. He did not spit curses like other prisoners. Instead, he carried silence like a weapon. The Queen could not understand how a fragile being could unsettle her so deeply. She had faced rival kings, assassins, and warlords, yet none made her question her rule the way this man did. The princess, however, felt no confusion. To her, the answer was clear. He was different because he was true. He spoke with no fear of punishment. He moved with no greed for favor. When he promised nothing, she believed him more than all the courtiers who promised everything. And in her young heart, a dangerous thought was born, that perhaps humans were not monsters, but something closer to hope. One evening, the Queen confronted him herself. She stood before him in the torchlit hall, her crown heavy upon her brow. She asked why he had not begged for his life, why he had not cursed her for destroying his people. His answer was simple. Because fear changes nothing. Because hate feeds chains. Because dignity is all a man has when all else is taken. The Queen felt his words like blades pressing against her armor. She turned away, refusing to show her weakness. But in that moment she realized the truth. The Empire could crush cities, burn worlds, enslave nations. Yet it could not break the spirit of this single human. And if one man could not be broken, what hope was there of breaking his kind? The thought was poison, yet it would not leave her mind. Later that night her daughter whispered again, "Why will you not see what I see? Why do you call him enemy when he stands taller than all who kneel?" The Queen silenced her child with stern voice, but the words sank deep, for even the Queen herself had seen something she could not deny. The human was beautiful, not in form but in spirit. And that beauty was far more dangerous than any weapon. The war outside raged without pause, but within the palace walls another war had begun. A silent one, a battle between pride and truth, between crown and heart. And in the center of it stood a single human, unarmed, yet more powerful than armies. A man who made even a queen wonder if conquest had already been lost. The Queen tried to focus on the war, but her mind returned again and again to the human. Reports of battles filled her throne room. Generals spoke of burning fleets and fallen worlds. But behind every word she heard the calm voice of the prisoner. His words were simple, yet they carried more weight than the boast of her entire council. She hated that her thoughts returned to him at night, when silence filled her chambers. Princess Alenia grew bolder as days passed. She no longer hid her interest in the human. She often brought him books from the royal library. She asked him questions about Earth, about the way humans lived, about the strange festivals and songs of his people. He answered with patience, never once raising his voice. His answers painted pictures of a world that seemed alive in her imagination, a world so different from the empire of stone and iron she had always known. The Queen warned her daughter to keep distance. She told her that humans were dangerous and clever, that their kind fought with fire that consumed everything. But the girl only smiled softly and said perhaps that was why the Empire feared them, because they carried fire not only in their weapons but in their hearts. The Queen had no reply to this. Her daughter's innocence cut sharper than any blade. The human was given work in the stables where alien beasts were kept. The guards expected him to struggle. Instead, he moved among the creatures with a quiet strength. Even the most violent beast grew calm under his touch. The soldiers whispered that it was unnatural. The Queen stood one evening to watch him. When she saw the beast lower its head before his hand, she felt a chill. Perhaps he was not only strong among men, but carried something older, something the Empire could not cage. One night, the Queen dreamed of fire. Not the fire of war, but a softer flame. She dreamed of standing in the ruins of a battlefield, and there the human walked alone, unbroken. carrying light in his hand. When she woke, her heart raced. She despised weakness, yet the dream clung to her. She ordered her maids away and stood before her mirror, staring at her reflection. A queen who had ruled through fear and iron. Yet in her eyes she saw something that had never been there before. Doubt. The council noticed her silence in meetings. They grew restless. They spoke of purging the humans from every star. They begged for harsher strikes, for fire that would erase Earth itself. The queen gave no answer. Her mind was heavy with her daughter's words and the humans' defiance. She wondered if the council was blind. They saw only enemies, but she had begun to see something else. Something far more dangerous than soldiers or fleets. She saw a future that did not belong to her alone. One evening, she summoned a human to her private hall. The guard stood back, unsure why their queen would face him without chains. She asked him directly if he hated her. He looked at her with steady eyes and said yes. But then, he added something that broke her calm. He said hate was easy. What he carried was harder. He carried pity for a ruler who thought conquest could last forever. The queen felt her breath catch. None had ever dared speak such words to her face. She raised her hand to strike him, but stopped midway. His eyes did not move. His stance did not change. In that moment, she realized striking him would not silence him. His words were already rooted inside her. She lowered her hand slowly. The guards whispered in shock, but she dismissed them with a glare. The human left the hall in silence, but his voice remained in her chest long after he was gone. Princess Alenia found her mother at the balcony that night. The queen stood staring at the stars in silence. The girl asked if she hated the human too. The queen did not answer. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her crown. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to remind her child that hatred was easier than doubt, but the words would not leave her mouth. Instead, she stood still as the stars burned bright above the empire she had built on fear. The war outside showed no sign of ending. Fleets clashed, soldiers fell, and fire consumed world after world. Yet in the heart of the palace, something deeper had begun to burn. Not hatred, not conquest, but something the queen had sworn never to feel. Something that threatened to unravel not only her rule, but her very soul. The days passed, but the bond between the princess and the human only grew stronger. She spent hours in the gardens asking him endless questions. He told her about rivers that glittered under Earth's moon. He told her about songs sung by children in the streets of ruined cities. He spoke of courage that came not from crowns or armies, but from standing beside one another. The girl listened with wide eyes and believed every word. The queen watched in silence. Her anger should have grown, but instead something else troubled her. She saw her daughter smile in ways she had not smiled before. She saw a light in the girl's eyes that court life had never given. Yet it was light stolen from the enemy. That truth gnawed at her. Each time she told herself she would end it, she found her voice faltering. The council grew restless with her hesitation. Reports told of humans rallying stronger. Entire colonies rose in rebellion despite brutal punishment. Admirals demanded more resources. They wanted firestorms to burn human settlements into dust. But the queen delayed. She gave vague orders, slow replies. Her generals whispered that her strength was fading. She could feel their doubt thick in the air each time she entered the chamber. One night, the queen called her daughter to her chambers. She asked why the child gave so much of her heart to a human. The girl looked at her with innocence and said it was because he never lied. He never promised safety. He could not give. He never bowed with false loyalty. He only spoke truth, even when it hurt. The queen sat in silence. She realized the child was not blind. She had seen what even rulers feared to admit. The human began to gain respect among the guards as well. Though many still called him beast, some saw his discipline. He never tried to escape. He never begged for mercy. He endured every insult with a silence that grew heavier than rage. A captain once mocked him, demanding he kneel. The human refused without raising his voice. The captain struck him, yet he did not flinch. That night, whispers spread through the palace. Even chained, the human would not bend. The queen dreamed again of fire, but this time it was her own palace in flames. She saw her throne shatter. She saw herself standing alone as voices cried out against her. And then she saw him again, the human, standing in the center of the ruins, unbroken. She woke with her heart pounding, her hands trembling. She dismissed her servants, hiding her fear behind a mask of iron. But inside she felt the truth clawing deeper, that perhaps the fire she feared was already burning within her halls. The war dragged on outside. Human forces struck deeper than expected. Supply lines failed. Armies that once marched with glory now limped back in defeat. The council grew louder in their demands for ruthless destruction. Yet every time they cried for blood, the queen's eyes turned to her daughter. She could not give the order that would erase the race her child had come to see as more than enemy. Her silence was not weakness, yet carried danger greater than any blade. One evening the queen went to the stables herself. She found the human resting by one of the beasts. The torchlight framed him in shadows. She asked him why humans resisted when the empire was too vast to defeat. His answer was quiet. Because surrender was a death greater than any blade. Because living without freedom was worse than dying in chains. The queen felt his words pierce the armor she had worn her whole life. She turned away quickly, but her heart was restless that night. She could not silence the thought that perhaps conquest was only a mask for fear. Fear of what humans had shown her. Fear that a simple truth could be stronger than crowns and fleets. She stood before her mirror once more and saw not only a queen, but a woman at war with herself. And the battle inside was fiercer than the one raging in the stars. In the silence of her chamber, she whispered a question only the walls could hear. Was the empire truly strong, or had it always been fragile before a fire no one could conquer? Her reflection did not answer, yet her own eyes betrayed her. They no longer looked like the eyes of a ruler certain of victory. They looked like the eyes of someone who had already begun to lose. The palace grew colder as the war dragged on. The queen felt the weight of doubt pressing heavier each day. She no longer trusted her generals fully. She no longer trusted her council completely. But most of all, she no longer trusted her own heart. For every time she closed her eyes, she saw the human standing unbroken. Every time she opened them, she saw her daughter's eyes filled with dangerous hope. The council's patience broke. One elder shouted in open defiance during session. He accused the queen of being blinded by weakness. He claimed she had let a human spirit creep into her judgment. The chamber erupted with voices. But the queen rose slowly, her crown casting shadows across the marble floor. She spoke in calm words, but every syllable carried threat. She warned them that her rule was law and her word was iron. They fell silent. Yet beneath their bows she felt their rebellion boiling. Alenia visited the human that same night. She carried food herself, though servants begged her not to. She sat by him under the starlight that filtered through the garden arches. She asked him what would happen if humans lost. He looked at her and answered without hesitation. Then they would die free rather than live as slaves. The girl lowered her head, shaken yet inspired. She had never heard loyalty spoken with such finality. Not loyalty to a crown, but to something invisible and eternal. The queen confronted her daughter afterward. She demanded to know why the girl risked her place for a human. The princess replied with a question that cut her mother deeply. Why did the queen fight so hard to keep the empire together if her people only obeyed from fear? Why did power matter if it could never win hearts? The queen struck the table in anger but could not answer. For deep down she knew the child had seen through the armor she had built her whole life. The human began to influence others in the palace. Servants carried whispers of his strength. Some guards began to respect him in silence. Even those who hated him could not ignore his endurance. He stood taller each day, though chains still bound his wrists. The queen knew the danger, yet she could not silence him. She feared killing him would not end his influence, but make him immortal in memory. His presence had become a storm she could not control. Her dreams returned with sharper edges. She saw her empire crumble in fire. She saw herself kneeling in ash. And always she saw the human, not as enemy but as figure of unshaken light. She woke sweating, gripping her sheets with trembling hands. She cursed her weakness, yet could not drive it away. She began to avoid her mirror for fear of what her own eyes might confess. The council pushed harder for Earth's destruction. They demanded full annihilation. They wanted no colony left breathing. But the queen delayed yet again. She gave excuses of strategy, spoke of timing, but the truth was different. She could not give the order because her daughter's eyes haunted her, because the human's words burned inside her chest. She knew if she gave a command, something inside her would break forever. At last she went to see him alone once more. She asked him why he did not hate her daughter when she was heir to the throne that slaughtered his people. His answer was soft but unshakable, because hatred was a chain, and he said he had seen something in her daughter that was rare, a heart uncorrupted by fear. The queen felt her breath falter. She wanted to argue, but no words came, for she too had seen it, though she tried to deny it. The human looked at her then, and spoke words that struck like thunder. He said the empire would one day fall not by human hands, but by its own weight, because no empire built only on fear could stand forever. She stared at him in silence. Her pride screamed to dismiss him. Her heart whispered he was right. She left quickly, but his voice followed her down every corridor like a shadow she could never escape. That night, the queen stood upon her balcony again. The stars stretched endless above her, yet felt suffocating. She placed a hand upon the cold rail, her crown heavy upon her brow. For the first time in her reign, she admitted to herself a truth she had never spoken. She feared not the humans, but the possibility that her daughter's heart might already belong to one. The queen could feel her empire cracking like glass, though its walls still stood tall. Rebellion spread across the colonies, and human raids cut deeper each month. Her admirals begged for more resources. Her council raged for destruction. Yet her heart grew heavier. She knew the empire's blade was sharp, but she also knew it could not cut the will of those who chose to die free rather than live bound. Princess Alenia no longer hid her closeness to the human. She walked with him in the gardens while guards watched nervously. She laughed at his stories. She studied his words, and she looked at him as if no chain existed. The queen's fury rose each time she saw it. Yet behind the anger lay fear. Fear that her daughter's heart was already beyond her control. Fear that she herself was losing her grip on destiny. The council moved in secret against her. They whispered among themselves that the queen had grown weak. They planned to remove her if she did not act soon. One night a general approached her chamber unbidden and warned her that her crown sat on dangerous ground. She dismissed him coldly. But when he left, she stood in silence, staring at the crown in her hands. For the first time, she wondered if it had grown heavier, because her strength was fading. She decided to test the human one final time. She summoned him to her throne without chains. The chamber gasped when he walked free, though guards still flanked him. She asked him directly if he desired her daughter. The court fell silent, waiting for him to beg or lie. But he spoke clearly. He said her daughter was far too beautiful for him to touch. He said beauty like hers belonged to stars, not to broken men like him. The queen's heart twisted at his words, torn between relief and pain. Alenia heard of this and wept in her chambers. She did not weep for shame, but for the distance he placed between them. She loved him not for victory or power, but for the truth in his soul. Yet his refusal struck her deeply. She longed to scream, to demand that he see her not as a princess, but as a girl who only wanted his eyes to meet hers. The queen watched her silently, torn between pride and sorrow. The council grew bolder after this. They demanded the human's execution to restore order. They claimed he had bewitched the royal line. The queen refused, but their voices thundered louder than before. For the first time in her reign, she felt cornered. To kill him would break her daughter. To spare him would break her council. Either choice threatened to end the throne she had fought her whole life to keep. That night she stood again before her mirror. She searched her eyes for the ruler she once knew. But in her reflection, she saw a woman divided. One side was a queen of iron, feared across the stars. The other side was a mother, shaken by her daughter's tears and haunted by a human steady gaze. She placed a crown upon her head and whispered a vow that she would not let her empire die, but neither would she let her child's heart be crushed without reason. The next morning, she entered the council chamber with fire in her steps. She declared the human would live. Gasps filled the hall, anger thundered, but none dared rise against her openly. She reminded them that her word was final, that her crown was forged in blood, and no council could unmake it. Yet inside she felt her own lie, for she knew it was not her crown that held her decision. It was the sight of her daughter's face lit by the smile of a human. That night the palace was restless. Guards spoke of betrayal. Servants whispered of curses. But in the garden 2 figures walked beneath the moonlight. A young princess whose heart burned with quiet hope, and a human who carried dignity like a shield. From her balcony the queen watched them, her chest tight, with war she could not win. Not the war in the stars, but the war in her soul. The palace no longer felt like a fortress of certainty. Shadows of doubt crept through its golden halls. Guards shifted nervously. Servants whispered in fear, and the council sharpened their words like blades. The queen stood at the center of it all, her crown heavy, her mind restless. She could not deny what her heart had seen. A human strength had begun to change the very pulse of her empire. Princess Alenia became more open in her affection. She no longer cared if eyes followed her. She stood beside the human in gardens, shared meals with him, and spoke to him as if he were no prisoner at all. The whisper spread quickly through every chamber. Some called it shame, others called it treason. But the girl only smiled, unbothered by titles or threats. In her eyes, truth was worth the weight of judgment. The council gathered in secret once more. This time their anger burned hotter than before. They argued that the queen had betrayed her oath. They claimed the throne was stained by weakness. Several voices even called for her removal. The queen heard every whisper carried back to her by loyal spies. Yet she remained silent, watching, waiting. She knew that one wrong step could send her empire into civil war. The human remained calm despite the storm around him. He worked without complaint. He spoke only when asked. But even in silence, his presence grew heavier than armies. He became a symbol, though he never sought to be one. Servants bowed their heads slightly when he passed. Guards lowered their eyes in quiet respect. The queen saw it all, and fear coiled in her stomach. Not fear of him, but fear of what he represented. A truth her empire could no longer bury. Alenia confessed her heart to him under the glow of alien moons. She told him she loved him not because he was strong, but because he was real. She loved him for words that cut through falsehoods, for eyes that never looked away, for dignity that chains could not steal. The human listened in silence. At last he spoke. He told her she deserved someone unbroken by war, someone not scarred by loss. She shook her head and held his hand for only a moment before guards stepped forward nervously. The queen watched in the shadows, her heart tearing in silence. The council stormed into her chamber the next morning. They demanded blood. They demanded the human's execution and her daughter's isolation. They shouted that the empire would fall if she allowed a human to corrupt its royal line. The queen rose slowly, her robe trailing like fire across the marble. She told them that no council could command her crown. Her word was law, and her decision was final. But her voice carried a tremor she had never allowed before. That night, she could not sleep. She paced her chambers, her crown resting on the table beside her. She wondered if she was losing herself. She had ruled with fear all her life, but now fear seemed hollow. What good was conquest if it could not command loyalty? What use was empire if it could not win hearts? She stared at the window as the stars burned bright, each one reminding her of the lives her war had taken. And the human's words returned again, sharp as ever. No empire built only on fear could stand forever. Alenia entered her chamber quietly. The girl placed her small hand upon her mother's arm. She whispered that she did not wish to hurt her. She only wished to follow what her heart saw as truth. The queen looked into her daughter's eyes and saw innocence mixed with fire. She realized no chain, no crown, no empire could silence that kind of devotion. For the first time in years, tears welled in her eyes, though she hid them quickly. Outside the palace walls, war still raged. Human fleets struck with precision that baffled alien admirals. Colonies rose again in rebellion despite crushing retaliation. And deep in her heart, the queen knew a reckoning was coming, not only between humans and her empire, but within her own soul. The question would soon demand an answer, and no crown, no throne, no council could answer it for her. The storm finally broke inside the palace. The council moved to strip the queen of power. They gathered in secret with generals who had grown tired of her silence. They marched into the throne hall with blades of law and banners of revolt. Their voices thundered with accusation. They declared she had betrayed the empire. They demanded she step down or be removed. For a moment the queen sat still, her crown heavy upon her brow, her eyes cold with rage. Princess Alenia ran to her side, trembling with fear but unwilling to leave her mother. The council sneered at the sight. They claimed the princess herself had been corrupted by the humans' poison. They shouted that the empire could not allow weakness to infect its bloodline. The girl stood tall despite her shaking hands. She told them she was not corrupted. She told them she had only seen truth. Her words cut to the chamber like blades sharper than steel. The human was brought forward in chains, accused of treason against a crown he never served. The council demanded his death as proof of loyalty to the empire. Guards lifted their weapons. The queen felt her heart pound as the chamber waited for her judgment. She rose slowly, the hall falling into silence. Her eyes swept across faces that once bowed in fear, but now burned with rebellion. Then she spoke, her voice like iron and fire. She declared that the human would not die. Gasps filled the chamber. Shouts of fury followed. Swords were drawn and accusations spat like venom. Yet the queen stood taller than she had in years. She told them that killing one man would not restore their honor. She told them that silencing him would not erase the truth he carried. She told them that an empire built only on fear was already broken. The council trembled, unsure if they faced a ruler or a storm. Her words left them no ground to stand upon. A general lunged forward in rage, blade flashing in the torchlight. But before the strike fell, the human stepped between. His chains rattled as steel cut across his arm. Blood stained the floor, yet his eyes never wavered. He did not strike back. He only stood there, shielding the queen with nothing but his body. The chamber froze in shock. In that moment, even her enemies could not deny the strength in him. Not strength of flesh, but a spirit that no blade could cut. The queen's voice broke through the silence. She ordered the guards to seize the traitors. Some obeyed out of loyalty, others out of fear of the human, who bled, yet stood tall. The council fractured in that instant. Some fled, others fell upon their knees. The rebellion ended not with armies, but with one act of defiance. The queen looked at the human's wound, her heart tightening. For the first time, she felt the weight of gratitude rather than pride. Later that night, the palace was quiet again. The human sat with his wound bound, refusing comfort beyond what was needed. The queen entered alone, her crown set aside. She asked him why he had shielded her when she had been his enemy. His answer was calm. Because her daughter needed her. Because he would not let hate claim what love still sought to save. The queen stood in silence, her chest aching with words she could not say. Princess Alenia entered then, her eyes filled with tears. She knelt beside the human and held his hand despite the blood. She whispered that she would never let him go, no matter the cost. The queen watched them, torn between her crown and her child. At last she closed her eyes and spoke softly, that if love was strong enough to survive chains, it was strong enough to outlive empires. Her words were not command but confession, and in that moment she felt freer than she ever had upon her throne. The war beyond the palace did not end that night, but within those golden halls a new beginning was born. The queen would rule still, but with a heart changed forever. Her daughter would walk beside a human, unashamed, and the empire itself would learn, slowly and painfully, that fear could not bind what truth had already set free. For in the end it was not armies that shook the stars, but the courage of one human, and the love of one princess that no crown could deny.